Wingman Joker, thank you for listening to this channel and please support the channel. Please subscribe. Chapter 22, Accidents. Leaving the magical tower after discussing a few things with his father, Adrian sighed as he looked at the sky. It was still noon. Thinking for a moment, he quickly made up his plan for the day. First, he planned to go check Chestnut Technologies and get done with it, then if he left early, he would go check a new house. He really didn't want to stay in that hotel anymore. The feeling of all the staff looking forward to cuckolding him wasn't pretty. He also needed to buy the demonic monster's meat for summer. He should probably be able to get some from the black market. Although humans can't eat it safely, it didn't stop a lot of idiots from experimenting. Remembering that Chestnut was not that far from the tower, he decided to go there on foot and enjoy the city's scenery. In Lumar City, the rural zones and the areas near the slums were a little dangerous due to being a little chaotic. On the other hand, the central zone around the tower was pretty safe as it was the most luxurious place in town. So Adrian slowly began to stroll around enjoying the scenery. A safe world like his was a rarity in between the myriad of worlds where having both a roof over one's head and a full meal was a luxury. Well, that never really stopped him from swift. He stopped thinking as a pair of hands pulled him directly into a dark alley to the side and pushed him against a wall. It took him some effort to control his nerves and not kill anyone immediately. He kept reminding himself that he was in a peaceful society, as he looked at his smirking captors. They were men dressed in demonic monsters, leather jackets with all kinds of magical tattoos all over their bodies, gangsters. "Boss, is this the one?" one of them said, making a young man who stood in the back step forward. "Yes," Lloyd, who was wearing a jersey and black pants, said as he eyed Adrian. "We meet again," he said with a smirk. Adrian glared at him. "What is the meaning of this?" he asked calmly. Although those gangsters had those magical tattoos that gave them the strength of a first-ranked warrior, he wasn't worried at all. "Oh," Lloyd was taken aback as he failed to see fear in Adrian's eyes. It took him a moment to remember that Adrian was a fool. "Nothing, I just want to teach you a lesson not to touch other people's property. Summer is not something you can touch at will," he said with a chuckle. "Make sure that he doesn't die," he told the men. "Just make sure that he will no longer be considered a man," he added with a hateful tone. "Like we did with that blonde kid or the bowler." "Doesn't matter." Loud spat. "Yes boss," the burly man said as turned to Adrian. "Sorry kid, I have nothing against you, but next time don't mess with those who you shouldn't mess up with, I will make it swift," he added as if it was not really his fault. He just took out a switchblade from his back pocket and flung it open. "Let's enjoy some barbecue tonight," another man smirked as he watched his friend begin his work. "Yes, let's feed it to him," another said as he looked at Adrian, wanting to see the fear in his eyes. "And film it, then." Just do it," Lloyd, who watched from the back, said coldly. But he was a little baffled. The men all stood in their place. "Hey, what are you waiting for?" he asked them. This was not the first time those guys did some bad things under his command. What was wrong with them? "What are you?" Lloyd wanted to go push one of the men, but he quickly noticed. He couldn't move at all, his muscles were no longer responding to him. In fact, moments later, he stopped being able to talk. "What the fuck? What a good advice." Adrian, who slowly pinched the man's hand that was grabbing him and pushed it to the side like some kind of garbage, said. "One should really not mess with others," he said as he shook his head. Nulls were weak. Very weak. Almost laughable. Those guys were not real knights, so just that rank spell that allowed him to use a certain frequency of sound waves was enough to paralyze them, was enough to turn them into living statues. Lloyd wanted to say something but he could barely move his lips. "This spell is a combination of two first-ranked spells. The first is called Sound Barrier, and the other is called Wind Signal," Adrian said, not explaining that despite the simplicity of this spell, it requires an extensive knowledge of the human body and how sound works. It is very efficient in dealing with idiots, and its only drawback is that the magician must be careful not to paralyze himself in the process, he explained pointlessly as he grabbed the switchblade from the man's hand. "You shouldn't really be waving this thing around," he added as he closed it. "Now tell me, what bad things did you do before?" He flicked his finger and asked the first man, the scariest looking one who grabbed him before. The man, as if hypnotized, began to speak despite not being able to move. "We killed a guy and raped his girlfriend in front of his corpse. We also scammed a man out of his money after we made his son a drug addict. We don't." Loud wanted to stop the man, but he couldn't make a voice. The man, as if completely losing control over his lips, began to talk about all kinds of atrocities he did. Apparently, those guys worked for Lloyd's father, who was a money lender, and in their course of business, they took a little too much liberty sometimes, especially with those who couldn't pay. I see, Adrian nodded. He didn't seem appalled at all of what the men did. You knew about that? He looked at Lloyd and asked. Lloyd shook his head with difficulty. He was the one who ordered us to do many of those things. The man who was getting integrated replied despite the hypnosis effect being over. He was not going to drown alone. I see, Adrian sighed, patting the man's shoulder and making him freeze again. What do you think I should do with you? He pondered as he looked at the terrified men's eyes. No one could answer. I will hold a vote then. Adrian told himself. Yup, let's go. Okay, he said after a few moments of talking to himself. It had been decided. Look, I have nothing against you guys, and you should really not mess with the wrong person in the future. He said, making the men feel a little hopeful. Then, it's barbecue time. He added with an innocent smile as he flipped the blade open again, making the men fall into despair. Ellipsis. It was an hour later when Adrian, whose suit smelled of a little smoke, left the alley and reapplied the disguise and repulsion spell on its entrance. Those guys needed a few more hours to learn their lesson. At least their stomachs were full. You are sick. We are sick. Definitely. It is justice. How could you? Didn't we go a little too overboard with that? No. Didn't you hear what those men did? But, lawless or justice? Damn, where is that coming from? Just stating facts. Come on guys, we voted and this was the result, stop regretting it already. Ellipsis. Adrian sighed as he looked at his suit. It was a little messed up due to him having to take off the jacket and laying it on the head of one of the men before getting to work, but thankfully it was not that bad and he managed to not get any blood on himself. It is just that he now smelled like cooked meat. Whatever. Hopefully, Lloyd's father would be smarter than his son, or else he would have to go cooking again. For some strange reason, he didn't feel disgusted at all after all what he did. He could tell that this was due to how harsh he was surviving in many of the worlds he was in. Making a few men eat their own little brothers was the last thing he could do. At least he was generous enough to cook it for them. Damn sicko, stop thinking about this. I feel sick. Come on, this and nothing. Blah, I am puking in my own mind. Struggling to contain his thoughts, Adrian slowly made his way toward Chestnut Technology. Reaching the new, 20 stories building with a huge Chestnut logo, in a mere 10 minutes later. Seeing that he was wearing a suit, the guards didn't stop him from entering and heading to the front desk. It was very crowded. Many young men and women were standing in line with their applications. Apparently Chestnut was hiring. Adrian ignored the chaos and headed to an empty receptionist to the side. May I help you? If those about the hiring, please check one of the others. The young woman said with a fake smile. I am here to see the CEO. Adrian said as he took out the company ID and presented it to the receptionist. It only had 3 lines. Chestnut, Adrian Red Oak, board member. Ah, the receptionist frowned. Master Adrian, she asked to make sure this young man was really a board member of their company. In fact, she already heard about the major merger that took place this morning, so she wasn't at all surprised by the new face. He was just too young. Yup, do you have an appointment with the CEO? She asked. We were supposed to meet tomorrow, but since I had time today I decided to just come here directly, he said with a smile. Ah, one moment please, the receptionist said as she used the magical phone to quickly call the CEO's office. Adrian let her do her job as he began looking around, inspecting the young men who were busy filling all kinds of papers. Chestnut was really one of the most sought-after employers nowadays. Most of those guys were clearly new graduates from magical universities. Most of them had rank 3 or 4 circuits, while the minorities were nulls. He nodded. Not bad at all. He couldn't wait to get his hand on some of those guys and then work them to death. The CEO will meet you. Please take the magical elevator to the 19th floor's meeting room. The receptionist who finished her call said politely, making Adrian turn back to face her and take back his card. Okay, thanks. He nodded in acknowledgement, then turned and headed to the elevator that took him directly to the 19th floor. There, as soon as the elevator door opened, a cold woman in a business suit was waiting for him. Board member Red Oak? She asked. Yeah, he said as he noticed her name tag. The CEO's secretary. This way please, the woman said as she turned around and began walking. The CEO was very busy due to her having to personally interview the newly hired managers. Thankfully she has a few moments to spare for you. The woman spat. Adrian was speechless. If he didn't know better, he would have thought that he was the one working for her, not the other way around. He could understand why the secretary would not know what the name Red Oak implied, since his father really kept his relationship with the company a secret. But how could Hazel not know? What game was that girl playing? He wondered as the secretary led him to a meeting room where a few young men were sitting outside. They were clearly the newly appointed managers the secretary spoke about, and they were clearly waiting for their interview. "This way please," the secretly said, opening the door and allowing him to enter. He nodded and walked right in, ignoring the envious looks of the waiting men and women. Inside he couldn't help one eyebrow as he looked at the brown-haired youthful businesswoman sitting behind the meeting table, crossing her legs in a professional manner. A total score of 10 out of 10. Holy, this chick is hot. Nah, too much OL vibe for me. I prefer Summer. I still like Sophie more. No, this one is good too, just imagine her with a whip. Really? Yup, sorry, too old for me. And too young for me. What, are we now revealing our perverted references to each other? Yup, damn, at least no one here into bestiality. What, are dragons beasts? Ellipsis. Can they turn human? Of course. Then they are okay. What, haven't you seen a pretty lady before? Hazel asked the stunned Adrian, thinking she was the reason for his freezing and not the storm of very bizarre thoughts that assaulted his mind. Quote. Adrian sighed. Is this how you welcome your young master after not seeing him for more than 10 years? He asked directly. He could tell that she had recognized him from her subtle facial expression earlier. Young master, Hazel smirked. Sorry to tell you, I am no longer your maid. She spat coldly, clearly holding a grudge over the past. Once my maid, always my maid, he said as he took a seat opposite to her. And still, I am the young master of the Red Oak family. You should at least stand up and greet me, he said with a frown. Wasn't this girl acting a little too disrespectful toward him? Barely passable is that. Young Master Franklin had already told me how much Lord Maverick tried to give you your current status. She said, I should probably congratulate you on rejoining the family. She said, ah, so that's it. Franklin was another of Adrian's step-brothers. He was much older than he and Donald, the son of Maverick's first cauldron. To tell the truth, Adrian didn't remember much about that guy other than his sleazy look. You work for my brother now? Adrian asked in surprise. That was her backer. Of course not, I work for Lord Maverick. She clarified. It is just that young Master Franklin was the one who asked Lord Maverick to take me in after your accident. If not for him, I might have ended up on the streets, and he always makes sure to check on me. Oh, Adrian paused. Was he getting cuckolded by his brother now? Kill both of them. Castrate then kill. Let's hear the girl's story first. Are you fucking my brother now? He directly asked. How dare you? Hazel stood up angry and struck the table. Young Master Franklin is not that kind of a man. She spat, defending her idol. It is a one-sided affection. Yup, Franklin might be using her to spy on father. Yup, whatever. Adrian sighed as he inspected her. I see you have already become a third circuit magician. Yes, all thanks to young Master Franklin's teachings. Now, do you need something from me? She asked directly, clearly a little annoyed with him. Oh, yes, 3 things. Adrian said, getting directly to the point. First, the family has decided to give me back all the stuff that belonged to me, so I will be the owner of 30% of the company. He directly said, I have been informed, but if you want to use those shares, you would have to wait for a board meeting to use them. She spat coldly. Okay, fair enough. Secondly, I want you to create a lab that would be under my command. Your esteemed father had already informed me, but this will take at least a week until we finish the restructuring after the merger. She replied professionally. What else? I want you to return to being one of my maids. He said, like hell. She froze as she watched him flick his finger, then it was as if she couldn't move at all. What? She could only barely whisper as tried hard to move every muscle in her body but couldn't. Impossible. The meeting office had magic dispelling mechanisms. This is not magic, he said as if reading her mind. This is called a hex. He added as he stood up from his chair. Then leisurely walked around the table heading toward her. She wanted to back up but couldn't. I told you, once you are my maid you will always be, he said as he pulled back her jacket, threw it on the table, and then began to carefully unbutton her shirt. She wanted to struggle but couldn't. She could only shed a few tears of resistance as she let him pull her shirt to reveal her body. What are? Shush, he said as he pushed her face onto the table, then began to draw a strange symbol on her white flawless back, making her feel as if an electrical jolt passed through her body. She couldn't see it, but on her back, a strange series of blood-red symbols appeared, forming a strange magical circuit. This was the forbidden technique he was testing on her years ago and was meant to allow her to use magic. Hazel was not a complete null. Since childhood, she suffered from a condition called disjointed meridians, which meant that she couldn't form a full circuit with all her body and couldn't use magic. That's why she was sold cheaply by her parents who were in debt. Adrian's idea was to use demonic blood tattoos as virtual circuits to connect those parts, and maybe use those connections to add additional circuits. Not bad. Thankfully you don't use magic a lot, or you would have really been in danger of exploding, he said as he inspected the degrading tattoos. Then using his finger that began to glow hot red, he began to trace over some of the lines. HSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSS erased came back to her. Memories of her being tied to a table and a crazy young man drawing something on her back. I am fixing the mistakes I have made in the past, he said coldly. Bear with it, he said as he swiftly finished going over some lines, totally disabling them. This shouldn't affect your level as a magician, he added as he used her shirt to whip his hand. You did forbidden experiments on me? She asked in shock as soon as she regained her power of movement. Yup, now imagine what would happen if the family knew that. While I might be punished a bit, I bet you would end up in some landfill. He chuckled. The words she wanted to say were stuck in her throat. He was absolutely right. Stop being a bitch. Adrian grabbed the chair beside her and sat down. You were my fucking experiment, and you will always be. Wasn't that the first thing I told you when I brought you from that illegal slave dealer back then? She glared at him as tears fell from her eyes. She could feel it as her entire plans for the future were crumbling right in front of her. Look, that accident in the past was not something I expected, Adrian sighed. But remember, you were the one who agreed to be a part of this to begin with in order to be a magician. You were the one who agreed to let me place that hex on you. I never forced you. Ah, what? Hale paused and gasped as she slowly recalled. She just looked at him as memories long forgotten unfolded one by one. Shit, she gasped in a very vulgar manner as she recalled a certain memory. In which, she and the other teens who were dressed in rags, were kneeling to the young Adrian. They drank a cup of blood in front of him and promised to be his faithful servants forever if he would allow them to use magic. How could she forget? You used memory manipulation on us? She asked in shock. Nothing to that degree, just a side effect of the hex that would make you forget things about it. I couldn't let anyone find out what I was doing, he said, and my experiments were a success. Look, you are already a third circuit magician. Hazel froze. He was telling the truth, but she was feeling very conflicted as for the past few years she thought this was because of young Master Franklin's help. Shit. Then, what did you do just now? She asked as she bit her lip. I just made a quick fix to make sure nothing bad happens to you, he said. I bet you have been trying to reach the fourth circuit lately and every time you try to construct it, you feel as if your body is on fire, he said. She nodded nervously. The virtual circuits I made for you were a little flawed. You were lucky you didn't explode or go crazy, he told the truth. Now it is a little fixed up, but if you want to rise up to be fourth circuit magician, I will need to make some new modifications, he said, touching her collarbone with his finger and tracing a line as if he was a surgeon planning his next operation. Ah, boom. Before Hazel could ask, the door was pushed open and a young man in a professional suit walked in. Hazel, we don't have time to interview all those. He froze as he watched the young man reaching out to his bare-chested idol CEO. What the? He yelled as he stumbled back in shock, forgetting to close the door and allowing the secretary and the waiting managers outside to take a sneak peek. Out, Hazel flared as she blushed from head to toe, flicking her finger to make the young man shoot out and the door close firmly. Bang, that was awkward. Adrian chuckled. Aren't you going to remove your hand? Hazel asked coldly as she grabbed her shirt. Due to the shock earlier, she totally forgot to put it back on. Should I? He asked as his hand squeezed her shoulder. She glared at him, biting her lip. After what happened earlier, she had long realized that all her former grandiose dreams were just pipe dreams. In the end, she was Adrian's slave. Okay, no need to look at me like that. I am not a bad guy, he said as he let go of her and stood up. Just remember, don't try to act like a bitch in front of me again, he said in a very cold tone that sent shivers down her spine, making her remember the young devil she used to know. How could she ever forget? Quote. She just glared at him. You could have informed me of this, Hex, you had on me without going through this drama. She finally spat. No, I just wanted to punish you a little, he said. She glared at him. Don't tell anyone anything about what happened here, especially Franklin. I know, she spat, feeling a little down. He was the one who told you to put me in my place, right? She nodded. Last night he came here and said that he wanted you to realize that the time when you were the prince of the Red Oak family is already over. She spat, clearly realizing that she was getting used. For some strange reason, the moment the hex was activated she lost all interest in all men besides Adrian. She could easily tell that this was because of the oath. I see, Adrian nodded. That guy had no idea about his true rank in the family right now. But this made him feel strange as, unlike Donald whom he argued with as a kid, he never made trouble with Franklin, this needed to be investigated. Do you have any news about the others? He suddenly asked, changing the subjects. I met Ash a while back, and have some news about Aura. I have no clue about any of the others as we went separate ways after the accident. She said as she got dressed and adjusted her jacket. Oh, how are they? Adrian asked with interest. Ash, that rough guy is an adventurer now, he works with the Black Diamond Gang to explore the Western Desert. I heard he is already a 6th ranked knight. She said. Now that she remembered that past, she couldn't help but realize why that guy grew so fast. And Aura? Adrian asked, remembering the pretty silent girl who was about his age. Aloli, shut up, she is our age. But, fuck, we missed such a chance. She is bad news, Hazel sighed, failing to notice Adrian's reaction. She was adopted by the Blue Soul family, and I heard she had already reached the 7th ranked circuit, becoming one of the strongest young magicians. Hazel said. Oh, Adrian paused. Grabbing that chick to check on her status is going to be interesting.